If you look at the media today, you'll find headlines telling drastically different narratives. War returns to the Middle East. Video capture of civilian soldiers after Hamas attack on Israel. Israel gives legal status to 19 settlements in the West Bank. An international law scholar says there is no genocide in Gaza. The Israel-Hamas war has dragged the dueling narratives of the Israeli-Arab conflict back to the top of our screens and the front of our minds. With terms like colonizer, genocide, terrorist, and apartheid being used like commas by both journalists and civilian alike, it can be hard to differentiate between fact and feeling. But this isn't a new phenomenon. If we look back just about 100 years, the water is just as murky. The truth is just as gray as it is today. But maybe if we make sense of the past, we can make sense of the present, so let's rewind. In 1905, Tel Hai was established by early pioneers as an agricultural farm in the northern Galilee. In 1918, due to World War I, Tel Hai was established as a kibbutz and a military post. Commander Joseph Trumpeldor, a man now surrounded by myth and narrative, oversaw the post. Following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire later that same year, the division of the region surrounding Tel Hai became a growing issue. The British and the French had separated the land between themselves, though Britain had also promised support to Arabs in establishing independence in French-controlled Syria. Their Sykes-Picot Agreement was already on thin ice. The date is March 1st, 1920. Tel Hai is home to a small number of early Zionist pioneers, among them Commander Joseph Trumpeldor. Between 150 and 200 Arab militiamen approach. Their leader is Kamal al-Hussein, a Bedouin staunchly opposed to the French and fiercely in support of Arab Syria. The pioneers of Tel Hai armed themselves, but they didn't fire right away. Trumpeldor, who was off-site at nearby Kfar Giladi, immediately returned to Tel Hai before the militiamen had reached its doors. Al-Hussein and his men demanded to search the compound, believing there to be French troops hidden inside. Trumpeldor let al-Hussein and a select number of his men in, guns still raised. In the upper room of the compound, Tel Hai resident Devorah Drechler called out her pistol was being taken, and it all goes gray. A shot rang out, but it is unknown by who. Drechler was shot in the mouth and is believed to have died immediately. Some reports claim that it was after this shot that Trumpeldor gave the order for the rest to shoot. Others say it was before, immediately succeeding Drechler's call-out. What is known for certain is what followed. Exchanged gunfire and grenades late into the night. Al-Hussein claimed he could calm the Arab side, but for an unknown reason, the fighting continued, pausing only momentarily for each side to retrieve their fallen. In the end, 6 Jews and an unknown number of Arabs were killed. Joseph Trumpeldor was shot twice and died while being evacuated. The Battle of Tel Hai quickly became mythologized, now being known as the first shots of the modern conflict. In order to understand what exactly happened that day, we must first decode the myth. Dr. Gerson Gary, the physician that treated Joseph Trumpeldor in the last moments of the commander's life, reported that his last words were, "No matter, it is good to die for our country." In a way, these purported last words perfectly summarize the myths surrounding Tel Hai. Yael Zerubbabel writes that the creation of myths is particularly important during the formative stage of a nation, when the need to foster social solidarity is acutely felt. It didn't matter that Trumpeldor's native tongue wasn't Russian, nor that he really didn't know much Hebrew. Attributing these words to him, and as his last for that matter, sensationalized the battle, but not in the same way for all Zionists. You see, the socialists and the revisionists took 2 very different sentiments away from Tel Hai. The socialists, emerging from the Labor Party, utilized Tel Hai as an example of why pioneers should show restraint and compliance outwardly while covertly training a stronger opposition. The revisionists, however, took Tel Hai to serve as proof that a united, public opposition to Arab and Britain alike is the only way Israel stood a chance at becoming its own state. The common ground? Zionism. One young Zionist leader found himself in the middle of this debate, Zev Jabotinsky. In 1920, Jabotinsky issued the following statement. "One should not blur and distort the historical truth. One cannot put a new face on the people of Tel Hai. One should not forget that the Tel Hai heroes fought and fell in a 2-front war, not only the war against bandits who wished to destroy a place of peace and labor, but also a war against the difference, helplessness, alienation, and fear at home, within the Yishuv and among its leaders." But as tensions between socialists and revisionists grow, Jabotinsky found himself needing to take a much clearer stance. Jabotinsky had previously stated that defending settlements like Tel Chai in the Upper Galilee was unrealistic and called for the pioneers living there to evacuate. Now that the battle at Tel Chai had taken place and the socialist revisionist conflict was raging, Jabotinsky made himself much clearer, and to no surprise, in opposition of the socialists. Jabotinsky had not yet solved the intra-Zionist debate. To our scholar Yael Zerubbabel, this comes as no surprise. She writes that because myths are so highly regarded as sacred texts, they are likely to be co-opted by conflicting positions and therefore contribute to intensification rather than easing of internal social frictions. Tel Chai's status as a national myth was solid, yet its meaning was far from that. In the midst of it all, Joseph Trumpeldor himself seemed to have, much like the battle, become a myth. The revisionist youth movement, Beitar, started calling itself the Association of Joseph Trumpeldor, a name socialists wholeheartedly condemned. To the revisionists, Trumpeldor was a military man, a fierce supporter of the issue who died nobly. Yet Trumpeldor was also at the center of the socialist attack against revisionists because it was Jabotinsky, a nationalist leader himself, who wanted to call back Trumpeldor during the battle at Tel Chai. Was Trumpeldor really the revisionist poster child? If their leader wanted him to withdraw, could revisionists claim Tel Chai as part of their argument for a direct approach if the leader they wanted to call back was ultimately killed? Regardless of Jabotinsky's actions, Trumpeldor fully embodied nationalist, revisionist ideals that day. And to truly demonize their intra-Zionism opponent, Jabotinsky argued that he only requested this gentleman because he predicted that you, socialists, would not send any aid in spite of all your heroic rhetoric. But wait, rewind. Did you catch that earlier word Jabotinsky used to identify Tel Chai? He called it a settlement, and by doing so handed the socialists the new crux of their argument in the 1930s and 40s. With Trumpeldor socially declared as a revisionist, socialists shifted their focus to the mission of Tel Chai as their way of maintaining the heroism of its fallen. Zerubbabel writes that by shifting the focus from armed resistance to settling and working the land, the labor movement argued that Tel Chai supported its advocacy of restraint in the use of arms against the Arabs and British, thus proving the priority of the settlement mission. Suddenly, the nationalist myth was starting to redefine its nationalism from being about the people to being about the nation itself, the land. The socialist argument had better footing. If revisionists wanted to win the public war, they'd have to respond. To no one's surprise, they took Trumpeldor's final words and used them as the socialists held Trumpeldor as the perfect example of why direct approach doesn't work. But he was also the perfect martyr for revisionists. In both action and those hallowed last words, no matter, it is good to die for our country. The reality of Tel Chai gets lost somewhere in between the dueling narratives. But with Jabotinsky having doubled down on his argument against the left, and the later rebuttal against the socialist settlement narrative, the social pendulum swings back in the direction of the revisionists, but not for long. The socialist portrayal of Trumpeldor's pioneer identity was not yet over. Pioneers in the 1930s and 40s are figuratively seen as holding a plow in one hand and a gun in the other, emphasizing both the divide and the coexistence of opposing approaches. Trumpeldor, however, had his left arm amputated. He was often portrayed by socialists as the pioneer with a plow and gun in the same hand. Zerubbabel says in this, Trumpeldor symbolizes their inseparability, in defiance of the revisionist position. The socialists could thus clearly benefit from demonstrating the hero's personal commitment to the plow as proof of his socialist orientation. Socialists clung to this image of the plow as the token symbol for their argument. It made its way into poetry and children's books, quite literally integrating itself into something mythical at heart. But, as with most things, there is a point of intersection. After all, Trumpeldor and Jabotinsky were close friends and conversed with each other frequently. With Trumpeldor gone, and two sides fighting over him, there had to be an answer within the gray, and there was, at least for the socialist revisionist conflict. In 1911, Trumpeldor writes, "I have not found a conflict between Zionism and communism, and I do not believe that this will become an issue for me in the future." While technically he was right, Trumpeldor wasn't alive to witness the debate between the two. One could amend his words to say that this will become an issue because of him in the future. However, what this proves, and what at last settles the socialist revisionist conflict, is the same allegory as the plow and the gun existing in the same hand. Trumpeldor's beliefs did not prove that there is no separating two conflicting ideologies, but rather that the ideologies can serve as complementary to each other. The communism of his statement is the socialist approach, and the Zionism, the revisionists. The man who started the controversy over Tel Chai also wound up being the man to settle it. From the onset of his framework until 1980, the plow and the gun were taught in Israeli schools as complementary tools, not opposing ones, specifically as they relate to Tel Chai. The separate chunks of black and white merged into gray, and some may say peacefully. But that wasn't the only gray area of Tel Chai. Remember that this started as a battle consisting of shots fired from an unknown side for an unknown reason. The Israeli perspective identifies the Arab militiamen as the approaching opponents against a compound simply trying to tend to the land and help the return of Jews to their native homeland. What was the Arab perspective? Truthfully, not much is documented about the Arab perspective on this battle. Zerubbabel, joined by scholar Amir Goldstein, is able to identify a few points on the topic. First, as 400 years of Ottoman homogeny in the Middle East had come to an end and the major colonial powers were in the process of negotiating its fate, the region suffered from a lack of stability and political unrest. This hits many of the foretelling signs of Tel Chai. First, a new people are moving in the region. While the Jewish people identified the land as their ancestral birthplace, 400 years of separation also made it Arab land. From the Arab perspective, settlements weren't about cultivating land, but claiming it. Additionally, there were other foreign powers at play. France and Britain were negotiating land division, but Britain was also communicating with the Arabs of Eretz Yisrael. Needless to say, the atmosphere was not one of tranquility and coexistence. In the period immediately preceding the battle at Tel Chai, Jabotinsky, Trumpeldor, and other Yishuv leaders convened a meeting to discuss the growing concern surrounding the safety of northern Galilee settlements given the political turmoil with Arab neighbors. It was Trumpeldor himself who requested more manpower, bringing more pioneers to the northern Galilee to defend it. While the Arabs in the region likely didn't know that it was Trumpeldor specifically who asked for more hands, his death at Tel Chai adds a new chilling level to its mythology. With one hand saying the Arab approach to Tel Chai was about the early Yeshuv's presence, the other hand focuses on the French-Arab dispute. Goldstein and Zerubbabel claim that the Jewish settlers of the Upper Galilee were thus caught in the strife between the French and the Arabs, unsuccessfully attempting to maintain neutrality in the midst of growing tensions and rising violence. This is to say, the original intent of al-Hussein and the Arab militiamen wasn't to kill Zionist pioneers, but rather to eliminate the French hiding in their midst. However, none were found. But the 1920 battle was not the only incident at Tel Chai between Arabs and pioneers. 2 more lives had been taken just a few months prior at the settlement. Without much clarity on the Arab perspective on an event that was not mythologized in their history, the likelihood of putting the gun and the plow in the same hand on this part of the battle remains minimal at best. And so the myth of Tel Chai lives on, shrouded in modern politics, debating the same concepts in the same conflict. In Israeli history, Tel Chai rings of early Zionism, national pride, and utter tragedy. Unknown by many, Tel Chai got its name from a combination of both Hebrew and Arabic, the Arabic word talha and the Hebrew word chai. One cannot help but think that they are the symbolic gun and plow in the same name. One can only hope that they are viewed as complementary, not conflicting, as we stare into an unknown future. At the center of the story, facts, and myth of March 1st, 1920 are the 8 lives of the people who died at Tel Chai, a Hebrew name meaning hill of life. Devorah Drechler, Sarah Chiswick, Zalman Belachevsky, Benjamin Munter, Zev Sharaf, Jacob Tucker, Yehuda Kunyevsky, and the man, the myth, the legend, Commander Joseph Trumpeldor. May their memories be for a blessing.